More primaries set for Tuesday. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker clashing with local mayors, and America's talking. This is the Center Square Daily for Monday, May 18th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. More primary elections set for tomorrow as the fallout from Saturday's races in Louisiana settles. Julia Letlow will face John Fleming in a runoff election for a U.S. Senate seat after incumbent Bill Cassidy was ousted following 12 years in public office. The Center Square, Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports Letlow nearly won Saturday's race outright, securing 45% of the vote and falling just short of that threshold needed to avoid a runoff. Fleming finished second with 28%, while Cassidy received 24%. But it wasn't just the race for the U.S. Senate seat in Louisiana that voters had to decide. Louisiana voters rejected all 5 proposed constitutional amendments in Saturday's election, turning down measures that would have addressed teacher pay raises, property tax policy, judicial retirement rules, and government authority over civil service jobs. Now, the Center Square, Louisiana editor Misty Castile reports one of the most costly and closely watched measures would have been the restructuring of education funding by dissolving 3 funds to finance permanent annual raises for teachers and support staff. Yet another proposal would have eliminated several other funds. Their balances would have been used to pay off about $2 billion in debt owed by the teachers' retirement system of Louisiana. Voters rejected that initiative. The Louisiana Federation of Teachers, citing the teachers' retirement system of Louisiana, saying the amendment was projected to reduce annual employer retirement contributions by about $271 million statewide, including about $199 million for K-12 systems. Another defeated proposal in Louisiana was Amendment 5, which voters Saturday said no to. Would have raised the mandatory retirement age for Louisiana judges from 70 to 75 years old. Advocates said the change would have allowed for more experienced judges to remain on the bench longer, but opponents said it could weaken accountability and effectively extend judicial tenure beyond current expectations. Now, some of the areas set for a primary Tuesday: Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. We'll have teams covering some of these races from all across the country. In Kentucky in particular, voters, they're heading to the polls Tuesday in some of the most closely watched primary races. They'll be selecting candidates for the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and state legislature. Now, the races for federal office have drawn intense scrutiny from national political figures, including President Donald Trump. The Center Square Apprentice reporter Andrew Ricey reports that one high-profile race has incumbent Representative Thomas Massie facing intense pressure from other Republicans in Congress and the president to step down. Massie, thus far, resisting Trump's pressure and is now set to face off against Ed Gallery, a Trump-endorsed candidate in Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. Alabama voters, they select partisan candidates for various statewide races tomorrow, but some districts for the U.S. House not going to count. The Alabama legislature approved a congressional map that redrew congressional districts in the 1st, 2nd, 6th, and 7th districts in the state. Races for those districts will occur in a special election set for August 11th. However, ballots for those races will still be printed in Tuesday's election. Votes for the 4 districts, again, will not count. There are primaries statewide in Alabama, including for U.S. Senate and for governor. Now, be sure to check your local election officials for other races and for whether or not there are local referendums on the ballot for your consideration in tomorrow's primaries. Now, with those primaries set, the question on national observers' minds is which of the 2 established parties will have the advantage heading into the November election. The Center Square staff reporter Morgan Sweeney looking into that question, reporting with multiple states pursuing redistricting efforts to favor one party over the other, Republicans could stand to gain about a dozen seats come November. But pocketbook issues like high gas prices and other elevated costs favor Democrats. Republicans currently hold a slim majority in the House, and either chamber is up for re-election in November. You've got the entire House and part of the U.S. Senate. Now, President Trump and others have said that Democrats have redistricted to their advantage in blue states, and they encourage Republicans to use their majorities in red states to do the same. Now, California, Florida, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah, they've all implemented redrawn congressional maps with different results, in some instances resulting in 16 potential new seats for Republicans and 6 for Democrats. California passed Proposition 50 in November, hoping to gain 5 more Democratic seats among its 52 representatives for the U.S. House. Utah only has 4 seats, all of which are currently held by Republicans, but redistricting efforts there aim to gain 1 Democrat seat in November. Texas and Florida represent the biggest gains for Republicans, should the party hold on to its seats in the U.S. House, with their redrawn maps potentially yielding 9 new seats in districts redrawn to favor Republicans. A Florida judge Friday heard arguments on a lawsuit to try and block the new congressional district plan that the governor there signed, and that could give Republicans a 4-seat gain in the upcoming midterm elections. That judge did not issue an immediate ruling in that case after hearing it Friday. And after several court rulings clearing the way for other efforts, Alabama and Louisiana will likely follow, adding 2 more potential seats for Republicans. South Carolina, they kicked off a special session Friday, mandated by the governor via executive order, where state legislators will decide if they'll pursue a new map for November or lay the matter to rest for now. The Center Square regional editor Alan Wooten reports debate could last multiple weeks, despite Memorial Weekend less than a week away. Now, let's get into Illinois in focus with some of the latest from Governor J.B. Pritzker, where he seems to be squaring off with mayors over a possible deal with the Chicago Bears, the state's budget, and the governor's residential buildings plan. But first, the governor was noticeably absent from public events the past 2 weeks. The spokespeople said that he was undergoing a procedure in a statement, but then that left more questions. The governor, in front of cameras just this morning in Chicago, he gave an update on his condition.
First of all, I was in Springfield. I started to feel something that I thought might be related to the procedure, or that, might be, as a complication. And so it was 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And when you're in Springfield at 10 or 11 o'clock at night on a Wednesday, and my doctor is in Chicago, I don't have a lot of choices about where I'm going to go to have that checked out, but I thought it was important to do it right then. And so went to the emergency room at Memorial. They were terrific. I talked to a couple of doctors who came in to see me, a nurse or two, and they, kind of patched me up and sent me home and said, this is not serious. I had a urological procedure, and there's, I would tell you and release any information if it was life-threatening or anything that would interfere with my ability to do my job. I should add that even though the doctor told me to take the week off, and I definitely was not appearing in public, I was at home, but believe me, I was on the phone with my staff constantly. I made a whole bunch of, wrote a whole bunch of letters, made a whole bunch of phone calls.
But the governor, during a media briefing availability in Chicago this morning, also took questions about the prospect of a deal coming together to keep the Chicago Bears in Illinois. Now, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said that he's got the only plan that will keep the Bears in Chicago.
I know that the mayor has no plan. He has come up with no plan at all about how the Bears would end up in the city of Chicago, so that's problematic. I'd love them to be in the city, but we're 3 years in now, and he still has no plan. So the Bears have said publicly, and I think they said so last Friday again, that they have now only 2 options, and that's the state of Indiana or Arlington Heights. We would like them to stay in the state of Illinois. And so I'm fighting hard to make sure that they can do that, and also, very importantly, because my North Star is protecting the taxpayers of Illinois, that we have something that works for the state of Illinois that's fair, as we are being fair with other businesses that want to come to Illinois or expand here, that we're being fair in the allocation of support for a business expanding in the state, while also protecting taxpayers across the state.
To the mayor's concerned about how their property taxpayers may be hit if they're not in a proposed mega projects area, The governor said that's between them and developers. But Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson also came down to Springfield the week before last, pushing for more local government distributive funds for cities. That is 10% of the income tax the state brings in. The local government distributive fund being part of a deal done decades ago to keep local governments from implementing their own income tax on top of a state income tax on top of a federal income tax, in the promise that the state government would collect that income tax and give 10% of that money back to local jurisdictions. That has been chipped away at for years and sits about 6.5% to close to 7% back instead of the full 10%. So, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, along with other cities' mayors, joining together to push back and say they need more of that local government distributive fund. The governor said the legislature's been meeting since January, and Chicago's mayors had plenty of time to approach the governor's office and legislators to get his priorities in front instead of waiting until the tail end of legislative session.
The mayor has shown up every spring at the end of session to pronounce what he would like to see happen. And as you know, the budget gets put together starting in November. I present my budget, well, really we start at the beginning of a fiscal year, but about in November, we're in the details of the budget. I present that budget to the legislature in February. So that seems like a good time period to come talk to the governor's office. Then there's February to May, there's all that time to come talk to the legislature, which has my budget in hand, or the governor's office. Again, we've seen almost nothing out of the mayoral administration here on that subject, or really any other. And so to show up in May and have a bunch of demands seems like late in the game, and it's unfortunate that's happened most years.
Other mayors also sounded off on whether or not they should get more LGDF, and also looking at that mega projects deal. Now, local governments, they are pushing back on another proposal the governor has, and that's the Building Up Illinois Development's Housing Initiative, or the BUILD Plan. It's an extensive proposal that would make sweeping changes statewide aimed at increasing housing supply, reducing costs, and speeding up development. Brad Cole is the executive director of the Illinois Municipal League, and he said his group released their housing plan after repeatedly being excluded from discussion around the BUILD Plan. Cole said being excluded, along with the nature of the proposal making statewide changes to laws, was why the Illinois Municipal League went forward with their own plan. The governor reacting to that proposal this morning.
Counter proposal, or whatever it was by the IML, really is just all about the state spending a whole big bunch of money and not doing what we really need to do, which is we need to make it easier for people, and I'm talking about local folks who own a piece of property, to build another cottage or whatever, or prepare, renovate a garage so that someone could live there. It's a very light change. I know that there are Republican, mostly mayors, who have stood up and opposed this thing. A few Democrats, I think, worried that we're taking local control away. The reality is that there is still all of the local control about the height restrictions, about how close the setback could be to the street, all of those other things. The decisions about that get made by local plan commissions and local city councils still. We're just trying to make it a little bit easier for a homeowner, for example, to create a duplex and maybe bring in their own grandparents or parents to live next door to them with their own door, lock and key, and a wall between them.
And finally, what about gas prices? Gas across the country remains elevated with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East over the Strait of Hormuz. Pritzker, he said the best thing to do is to end the U.S. operations. He blamed the Trump administration for increased costs. And while the entire country is paying more, drivers filling up in the land of Lincoln, they pay among the most in the region, as the state levies nearly 50 cents a gallon just in state taxes. That's on top of any federal gas tax. Now, while some have been pushing to suspend Illinois' gas tax, second highest in the country, highest in the region, the governor, he hasn't given full-throated support to the idea, but he says he also hasn't opposed the idea.
No, I haven't articulated opposition. I just have said that, when we do that, we have to be careful about the consideration of, very importantly, Illinois is in the center of the country, and we are a logistics and transportation hub. And when we stop investing in our roads and our bridges and our water ports and our airports, that's bad for our overall economy. So we have to weigh those things and measure. As you know, several years ago, we suspended the increase in the gas tax. That's something that I know is being considered by members of the General Assembly in general. But it has an effect on whether or not we can continue the work that needs to get done. So it's all in consideration, and there's another 2 weeks, which in the legislature in May is like a lifetime.
Now the legislature returns this week for the final 2 weeks of session, starting with the Illinois Senate this evening. They'll be rolling in at about 4 o'clock, get that per diem, and then they'll be heading off to events and a full day of work expected tomorrow with afternoon committee hearings, and they're scheduled until May 31st, and that's the deadline to pass measures with simple majorities, including the state budget. Stay up to date with the latest happenings at the state capitol in Springfield with our team of reporters at thecentersquare.com. And be sure to subscribe to the Center Square Daily's newsletter to get these stories and more in your inbox only from thecentersquare.com. Now it's time for America's Talking with headlines from across the country, where you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter free at thecentersquare.com. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to take up a case regarding alleged sex discrimination in Georgia public schools. The case, Crowther versus Board of Regents of University System of Georgia, focuses on 2 alleged instances of sexual discrimination in the Georgia school system and was accepted by the U.S. Supreme Court Monday. The Center Square Princess reporter Andrew Rice reports that in one case, a former Georgia Institute of Technology women's basketball coach claims that she was not given similar resources as the men's team. In the second case, an art professor at Augusta University argues that the school conducted an improper investigation into sexual harassment claims before firing him. Both individuals claim the school engaged in Title IX employment discrimination in each process. A lower court argued that employees cannot automatically sue for sex discrimination employment claims. In other Supreme Court news, there's been no movement on several high-profile gun control cases. The Supreme Court's next conference scheduled for Friday, where they'll consider different cases and whether or not to take those, with an orders list scheduled to be released Tuesday after the Memorial Day holiday. 8 retired Pittsburgh public safety workers received more than $60,000 last year in taxpayer-funded payouts for unused leave, according to an investigation by the Center Square. In all, 17 municipal retirees in the Steel City cashed out on more than $40,000 from unused leave for sicknesses, vacation, or personal reasons. The Center Square investigative reporter Mark Strickers reports all worked in either the police or fire bureaus. A police commander received the most, $84,308. An assistant police chief, acting police officer, earned about $82,422, while a police detective made $68,000. 2 fire battalion chiefs, including cashed out roughly $63,000. Now, those payouts amounted to roughly half to 3/4 of each man's annual salary last year. The findings highlight how Pittsburgh's public safety union kept unusually generous leave protections, even as the city enacted sweeping fiscal reforms in 2004. In the days after California Senate Republicans signed a resolution opposing raising taxes on businesses to pay off more than $20 billion of COVID-era unemployment insurance debt, Republican State Senator Roger Letlow spoke out about the state's outstanding debt. Now, since the debt's growing every year passes, Letlow said the debt ends up costing the state's businesses and their employees more and more. The Center Square reporter Madeline Shannon reports Senate Joint Resolution 15, which every Republican senator signed on to as a co-author, asks the U.S. Congress to pass federal legislation, that is, preventing an increase of federal unemployment taxes on businesses. Now, a May 2025 report from the California Employment Development Department shows California initially took on $17.5 billion of unemployment insurance money through the CARES Act of 2020. And that was to help the state increasing number of unemployed residents who lost work at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the department in California report that shows initially $17.5 billion grew to a $20.5 billion loan balance by the end of 2023. And that ballooned to a $21.6 billion balance by the end of 2024. And North Carolina's general fund revenue is over the fiscal biennium, increasing by $2.6 billion to $71.1 billion. And that's according to the Office of State Budget and Management. Center Square Regional Editor Alan Wooten reports the agency said several factors supported the revenue growth, including its sustained boom in artificial intelligence investments, strong stock market performance, and robust corporate profits. Now, the concerns heading forward are higher energy and commodity prices, market risks, and rising interest rates. The population in that state has grown roughly 17%, from about 9.5 million to 11.2 million people. Businesses have flocked to the state, in part drawn by the declining corporate tax rates that will eventually be zero. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studio in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.